His Promised Land, Chapter 12. While I am on the subject of John Brown, I am reminded of the most important incident that ever took place at Ripley during all of the years of the activities of the abolition group. Strange as it may seem, no one placed any importance to the episode when it occurred because we did not know what was in the mind of Harriet Beecher Stowe. It was she who took the incident and wove it into the pages of Uncle Tom's Cabin, making it one of the most appealing and forceful attacks of this epoch-making book. I am referring to that incident of Eliza with her babe in arms crossing on ice chased by dogs to the water's edge. This all really happened, but it took place at Ripley. I was not involved in this adventure, so I had to depend upon my friends who were and what I actually heard, though I did not know at the time what the trouble was. I have the story directly from Reverend John Rankin, to whom Eliza told her story within an hour after she had made the crossing, as she sat by his fireside in his hilltop home. Eliza was a young mulatto woman who lived back in Kentucky. She was not married, but her baby was ascribed to the overseer of the plantation. The day before her flight, a slave dealer had been in close conference with her master, which meant some of the slaves were being sold down the river, as Kentucky was a slave-breeding and not to any extent a slave-using state. This alarmed her to the point she decided she would run away with her baby rather than be sent to the cotton fields, which had a bad reputation for treatment of slaves. Making her plans for escape, she left home early in the morning in midwinter, without any preparations for the journey or knowing how she would get across the river or to whom she was to apply for aid. In other words, she up and left, trusting to the fortune of taking care of itself. How she stood the journey carrying her baby is still a mystery to me, but she did it with a mother's determination and courage, arriving on the banks of the Ohio after dark, exhausted and driven to desperation by the cold. Seeing a light in a cabin, she took her chances, opened the door, and walked right into the arms of a white man. She was badly scared, but so utterly miserable she did not care what happened to her. Fortunately, the man was a gentleman living alone and was not a slave owner. Her condition so aroused the sympathy of the man, he immediately made a place for her by his fire. While she was thawing out, he prepared food for her. While she ate, he accused her of being a runaway, which she freely confessed. Then he told her how helpless her case was. Though the river was still frozen over, it had been thawing for several days, and the ice was so rotten that no one dared go on, let alone attempt to cross on it. He further advised her to give herself up and go back home. She admitted she had about made up her mind to follow the gentleman's advice when she heard the baying of the dogs, which she knew were on her trail. This made her so afraid she determined to go ahead and take her chances. When the white man heard the dogs, he became greatly agitated, again and again advising Eliza to abandon her plans, which meant sure death. Seeing that she was determined to make the venture, the old fellow gave her a woolen shawl to put around her baby. He then led the way out of his cabin towards the river. On the way, he took a long wooden rail off the top of his fence, advising her that when she broke through the ice, the rail would catch on both sides of her, preventing her from being drowned. He then went back to his cabin, leaving her alone. She had gotten down to the river's edge, stepped on soft ice, and went through. This made her stop and hesitate. As she was standing there trying to make up her mind what to do, the men and the dogs came down the bank at her with such a rush she was forced to hurry on or be captured. As she ran out on the ice, the dogs were at her heels, but refused to go further. Strange as it may seem, the ice held until she disappeared into the darkness. When the men came down the bank, they yelled for her to come back, and then began firing their pistols over her head. The sound of the bullets drove her on faster and faster until, coming to a weak spot, she went through the soft ice into the river. Throwing her baby from her, she clung fast to the rail, thus prevented from sinking to the bottom of the river. Scrambling out as best she could, she felt around in the darkness for her baby. She did not know what way she had thrown it, despite her effort to save herself. In her desperate effort to save herself, so it was some time before she found it. All the while, the dogs on the bank kept up a fearful noise, while the men were yelling and firing in her direction. These unnerving things set her more determinedly on her way, until again she broke through the ice, and again she threw the baby from her, while she held on to the rail. Now cold, wet, and weary, she struggled out to find her baby and wearily continued her journey. A third time she broke through, and a third time she had to go through the same efforts to secure her baby. This time she was so weak and exhausted, her clothes frozen to her body, she did not have the strength to even pull the rail along with her, so simply left to trust that the ice would hold, or else it would swallow her and her baby up. The ice did hold until she reached the firm land. As she stepped off the shore ice onto the land, weary and disheartened, a caring hand came from some unknown source out of the dark and grabbed her. She told Reverend Rankin this was the last straw. She sank down on the ground and began to cry, feeling she was lost. Then the baby began to cry, and a voice out of the darkness said, "Any woman who crossed that river carrying her baby has won her freedom." It was Chance Shaw, one of the Ohio Patrol. Shaw now helped her to her feet and threw the wet shawl away, giving which the old gentleman had given her to protect the baby. Carrying the baby in his arms, he helped Eliza up the bank, guiding her through the streets of the town until he came in sight of the Rankin beacon light, which shone every night in the window. Pointing to the light, he told her if she would follow it, she would find friends. The first any of the Rankin household knew of the presence of Eliza was when Reverend John heard someone poking the fire in the sitting room. The door being always open to refugees, she made her way into the house and was poking the fire to warm her cold baby and restore comfort to the baby. Later, Rankin supplied dry clothes for mother and baby. While she sat by the fire, she told the story of the escape and crossing to Reverend Rankin. On the subject of Eliza, she, Harriet Beecher Stowe, had this to say. Last spring, while the author was in New York, a Presbyterian clergyman of Ohio came to me and said, "I understand they dispute the fact about the woman's crossing the river. Now I know all about that, for I got the story from the very man that helped her up the bank. I know it is true, for she is now living in Canada." The Presbyterian minister we now know was Reverend John Rankin, as he was of that denomination. Furthermore, he was the only one that could know that Eliza had traveled to Canada over the Underground Railroad, of which she was an active conductor at that time. Reverend John Rankin did not dare confess his knowledge of Eliza openly, nor could Mrs. Harriet Beecher Stowe associate him with the crossing. If she had, he and his sons would have been sent to jail, their property confiscated, so there was every reason why neither the minister nor Mrs. Stowe should openly declare his connection with the affair, nor specify Ripley as the point where the episode took place.